Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cardiometabolic Beat, brought to you by the Cardiometabolic Health Congress. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Joe Pizzorno. Dr. Pizzorno is a physician, educator, researcher, and one of the world's leading experts on science-based natural and integrative medicine. He is also the editor of Integrative Medicine, a clinician's journal, the most widely distributed peer-reviewed journal in the field. Dr. Pizzorno was part of our recent masterclass on the intersections of integrative medicine and cardiometabolic health, where he delivered an excellent talk on the role that environmental toxins have on exacerbating cardiometabolic risk. This will also be the topic of our discussion, and we are also featuring some specific patient perspectives as well. Hi, Dr. Pizzorno. Welcome. It's so nice to have you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you. Great talking with you again.
Of course. To start us off, I'd first like to ask you if you can give us a brief overview of what toxins are and their most common sources, and also how we come into contact with them.
Great. So the definition of toxins is very human-centric because, nature does, if you might say the physical world doesn't care, it just has all these elements. Mm-hmm. So as we evolved as a species, we had to use the food in our environment to create our bodies and evolve as a species. So we got very good at using what was in the environment, and they end up being called vitamins and minerals and proteins, carbohydrates. And there were some metals and chemicals in the environment that we couldn't make work for our physiology, like arsenic, for example. So we developed various enzymes and methods for getting rid of them. So basically, we can define toxins as any metals or chemicals in the environment that don't work with our physiology, and even worse, they poison our physiology. So as we evolved as a species, we're good at getting rid of some things, like, for example, arsenic. We're good at getting rid of arsenic because we're exposed to it. Mm-hmm. But as we start to industrialize our world, we started releasing into the world things like cadmium and lead and mercury. Well, we weren't exposed to those as we evolved as a species, maybe a little bit when we ate fish, but it wasn't enough for us to get really good at getting rid of it. So these things are bad for us. It's not just these metals that are bad for us, but we at this point have also released a lot of chemicals into the environment. And many of those chemicals were intentionally designed to be difficult to break down by biological systems. So when we put a chemical in the environment like DDT, for example, well, it stays in the environment because they just don't break down. So long answer to your short question. Basically, any metal or chemical that we're exposed to that poisons our physiology is an environmental toxin.
Wow. So just out of curiosity, do you recommend to people just to use all natural products, like cleaning products, for example, and maybe avoid some certain types of fish?
Yes. So as you know, I've done a lot of lecturing to doctors as well as consumers all over the world about how these chemicals and metals are poisoning our physiology. So the next thing is, well, what do you do about it? And number one is avoidance. There's no substitution for avoidance. Just avoid the stuff. And the reason we want to be as aggressive as possible about avoiding things is because there's some things we're having trouble avoiding. So we got to avoid what we can, so we'll have more capacity left over to deal with the things that we can't avoid. So for example, I live in Seattle. Now, Seattle is a relatively healthy city in terms of the environment compared to other parts of the country. But in the summertime, July and August, when it doesn't rain for a couple of months, we have built up a lot of smog and air pollution and such. So even though I try to be as healthy as possible, there's a limit to what I can do about the air that I breathe. Well, yes, I can put air filters in my house, which I've done, but you have to go to the groceries and go visit your friends and family, things like this. So you can get exposed anyway.
Right. That makes sense. You just have to be as careful as possible, I suppose.
Avoid everything you can.
Yeah. So what is the role of these toxins in contributing to the development of cardiometabolic risk or diseases like hypertension, cardiovascular disease, or type 2 diabetes and obesity? Do these work in concert with conventional risk factors like unhealthy lifestyles, for example?
Yeah, great question. So one of the challenges with conventional medicine is they're always functioning downstream. So look at this. We have people with cardiovascular disease have high levels of cholesterol, therefore cholesterol is bad. Okay, so what's happened here is that we then start giving people all these cholesterol lowering medications, which end up having very little impact on death rate. And why is that? Because they focused on the wrong thing. They focused on cholesterol. Well, yeah, cholesterol was too high. But cholesterol, remember, almost all that cholesterol in the body is made by the body because the body needs it. So why would the body make something that damages it? Well, it's not the cholesterol that's the problem. It's when the cholesterol becomes damaged, when it becomes oxidized. So everybody knows about the HDL, LDL test for cardiovascular risk. And what that does is looks at high density lipoproteins versus low density lipoproteins. And what you find is that as the high density lipoprotein levels go down and low density lipoprotein levels go up, you get more cardiovascular disease. Well, why is that? It's because the low density lipoproteins are more easily oxidized and more easily make oxidized LDL. And oxidized LDL or ox-LDL you get from your laboratory is way more predictive of cardiovascular disease than is HDL-LDL ratio. So let's unpack that a little further. Why is our cholesterol getting oxidized? Well, it's being oxidized for two reasons. Number one is because we're being exposed to oxidizing toxins in the environment. I'll talk about those a lot in a moment. But equal with that, we have lost from our food supply many of the molecules that protect us from these toxins. So let's go further. Let's look at lead. Now, everybody may be saying, well, man, we banned lead way back in 1978. And we started banning it earlier, but by 78, most of the rules were in place. You might say, okay, isn't lead not a problem anymore? And indeed, if you look at blood levels of lead, since we banned lead, they've gone down pretty significantly. That's really good. But the problem is people who are older, in my age group, for example, we formed our bones when there was a lot of lead in the environment. So then when people get older and start losing their bones, the lead comes out. You start getting higher levels of lead. So when the researchers then looked at the amount of lead in people right now, particularly look at the amount of lead in their bone, they then looked at the correlation of coronary artery disease, or just heart disease, and heart death. They found a strong correlation. And matter of fact, they determined that 1/3, I want to say this real clearly, 1/3 of fatal heart attacks are due to lead. Okay, 1/3.
Oh, no.
1 out of 3. Okay, so lead, why does it do that? Well, all kinds of reasons why it does it, but one reason is because it increases oxidative damage in the body. But there's another toxin, and that's arsenic. So while lead is responsible for about 1/3 of cardiac deaths, arsenic accounts for 1/4 of cardiac deaths. So just between lead and arsenic, we have the cause for half of deaths from cardiovascular disease. So folks, taking statin drugs doesn't do much for lead or arsenic. Might make the cholesterol levels go down, might make you think things are better, maybe a tad better, but 90% of the problem has been missed.
Wow, that's really interesting. So what you're saying is you can't just take a medication to help you out with this.
No, that's why these natural health products are so important, because not only do they provide us missing nutrients because the food supply is so screwed up now, but they also can provide us, when you know how to do it, provide us with a lot of these natural molecules to help get these toxins out of our body more efficiently. But not only that, and also help protect us from these toxins. Let me talk about arsenic. So 1/3 of people in the United States, technically 35% of people in the United States, have arsenic levels in their bodies known to cause disease. I already mentioned cardiovascular disease, but arsenic is one of the primary causes of cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer. They all go up dramatically with arsenic. So things like arsenic are hugely problematic. So I was wondering, boy, why aren't we paying more attention to arsenic? Everybody's aware of lead. No, we've done a lot of good things for lead, but not as much as we still need to do. How come we're not paying more attention to arsenic? Well, I found two things. One is the arsenic levels have gone up a little bit, but more importantly, our ability to protect ourselves from arsenic has been depleted, has been sabotaged. So how do we get rid of arsenic? We get rid of arsenic through methylation. I'm sure you've talked about methylation a lot to your audience, and you've talked about the MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase polymorphisms, where people don't convert folic acid into the methylated folates. So, and why is that important? Because the way the body gets rid of arsenic is through methylation. So you need methylfolate to get rid of arsenic. So how have we sabotaged that? Well, number one, we stopped eating foods high in natural folates. So what are those things? Well, whole grains and fermented foods and things of this nature have natural folates in them. But because we've lost so many of those natural folates from our diet, we start getting people folic acid. Well, folic acid is not natural folate. Matter of fact, folic acid doesn't exist in nature. So in order for folic acid to become methylated, to be useful then for arsenic detoxification, it has to be methylated through MTHFR. Well, 1/4, 1/3 of the population, their MTHFR doesn't work very well. So what's happened is for 1/4, 1/3 of the population, by the loss of the foods in their diet that are rich in methylfolates, and they've made themselves more susceptible to arsenic toxicity. Okay, but it goes more than that. So when the body is detoxifying arsenic, it goes through a two-stage process. Stage one is what's called MMA, or monomethyl arsenous acid, but just wait, it's arsenic with a methyl attached to it. Now, interestingly enough, it's actually 8 times more toxic than elemental arsenic. But then we do a second methylation real quickly to produce dimethyl arsenic, which is 400 times less toxic than elemental arsenic. So when things are working properly, we go through this double-step methylation process really quickly and get rid of it, okay? But some people, either due to genetics or to loss of important molecules in the diet, they get stuck at the MMA level. Now, when I say stuck, it means it takes longer to get rid of the MMA. So it's in the body for longer, so body levels are higher in the body. Now, eventually we will get rid of it, but it's higher for a while. Well, it makes it way more toxic. So not only do we have a problem with not enough methyl groups, but it turns out flavonoids in the diet, these are typically the things that make the food, give foods both affect their flavor, but also affect their color. So a number of these flavonoids do two things that are critical. Number one is they help the enzymes get rid of arsenic to work more effectively to get through the MMA phase to the DMA phase more quickly. Okay, that's nice. And the second thing they do is, remember I said that arsenic causes a lot of cancer? Well, one of the ways it does that is by damaging the DNA. Well, it turns out that a bunch of these flavonoids protect the DNA from the arsenic damage. Okay, that all sounds great. But when you grow foods chemically rather than organically, the level of these flavonoids that are so critical for protections, for example, from arsenic, they go down dramatically. There was one study I've been quoting a lot where they looked at tomatoes, and they looked at, it was really, really well done. It was done, first off, it was in a greenhouse, so it was totally controlled. So control for water and air and seeds and sunlight, everything is all controlled. The only difference was fertilizer. But the other thing they did was they actually then measured the molecules in these tomatoes for a whole year period of time. Because it turns out these levels of these flavonoids in the tomatoes varies. So when it's super hot and sunny, well, those tomatoes can produce more of these molecules that protect themselves from ultraviolet. Okay. Or conversely, if they're under anaerobic conditions or not enough sunlight, well, there's different kinds of stressors. So the levels of molecules vary over the year. What's fascinating, when you grow these foods chemically, these flavonoids either totally disappear or decrease by huge amounts. And there's one in particular called fluoretin, which decreases 90% when the foods are grown chemically. And why do I say fluoretin? Because fluoretin is one of those molecules that helps us get rid of arsenic more safely and more quickly.
Wow. So basically, it's very important to have a healthy diet and possibly just buy organic fruits and vegetables. Otherwise, it seems kind of pointless because you're just putting chemicals in your body.
Yes. So many of those foods are contaminated. So it's not only organic foods, but you want to get fermented organic foods as well. Make sure you're getting plenty of those folates, because those methylated folates are necessary not just for getting rid of arsenic, but methylation plays a huge role in many aspects of our physiology. And we've basically sabotaged it by removing fermented foods from the diet and replaced with folic acid. That doesn't work for 1/4 to 1/3 of the people.
Wow. And is there arsenic in the water supply usually, or is that just a myth?
So 50% of the public water supplies in the United States have measured their arsenic level, and 10% of those public water supplies have arsenic levels known to induce disease in humans.
Wow. And
then we have the problem of private wells. A lot of wells are contaminated without people realizing it. So, for example, if a person drinking water from a well in Maine, they must be tested for arsenic, because some of the highest arsenic in the world has been found in the water of Maine. Okay. And how do they find that? Because there's a cluster of a bunch of people with cancer and cardiovascular disease. They're trying to figure out why. And they figure, oh, they're all drinking water from wells that are contaminated. So if people are on drinking water from wells, they've got to make sure the wells are tested.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So what are some of the initial steps that you would recommend to a patient who may be experiencing symptoms of toxins? And what should their physicians be checking first and foremost to better address these impacts?
That's another very good question. So I wrote an editorial, I think about 3 years ago. It's in PubMed. People can put my name in PubMed and find it, in which I recommended that the standard of care, that is how we address people on a daily basis in primary care, needs to change. And I believe everybody should be measured for blood levels of lead, urine levels of arsenic, and blood levels of a liver enzyme called GTTP. So let me go back and talk about that. So lead levels in the blood, very predictive of disease. And while we've done a good job of decreasing lead exposure, we still have a lot of lead, particularly in older people. It's got to be tested. I mean, it's more, I personally consider it more useful than testing a person's cholesterol levels, because I'm not so much concerned about the cholesterol as I'm concerned about why is the cholesterol getting screwed up. Anyway, so lead's important. Arsenic, I already talked about that. It's a simple urinary test to see if people are being exposed to arsenic at levels that cause disease. The reason I recommend the liver enzyme GGTP is because that's the enzyme that our smart bodies produce more of when we're being exposed to toxins. So as people get exposed to toxins, chemical toxins, metal toxins, any source of oxidative stress, the body produces more GGTP because that recycles glutathione. And glutathione plays a critical role in protecting us from environmental toxins. So our smart bodies exposed to toxins, let's send more GTTP. Now, the normal range for GTTP is 10 to 60. Okay, that's fine. But a GTT above 30 is indicative of toxicity. A GTT above 30 has an increased risk of diabetes of a factor of about 8. Okay, so clearly what's happening is diabetes is primarily being caused now by environmental toxins. And you can look at then the GTTP and say, yep, it's elevated, person's being exposed to toxins. So that means you got to start doing something about it. So this is very diagnostic of what I just said. You need to determine, is a person toxic? You measure those 3 things, you're going to pick up the vast majority of toxicity. And not all of it. Okay, some people are way more susceptible to multiple other toxins, but that'll give you a good idea. Then once you figure out a person's toxic, then you got to do 2 things. I mean, I do 3 things, but let's start with number 1. Number 1 is figure out where they're coming from. Stop exposure. I don't care how natural the intervention you're using is. It's always better to just not be exposed. So everything you can do to stop exposure. Second, then, is look at the body's normal processes for detoxification and support those processes. And it's a real simple one. And this is one I use for my patients who come in and say, boy, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm just, everything makes me toxic. I take a vitamin, I get sick. It doesn't matter what they do. Okay, what I do with those people is I give them fiber, good old natural fiber. And why is that? Well, because the main way the body gets rid of toxins is through the liver. And once it's modified in the liver, it dumps it into the gut, where the body expects it to bind to fiber, get out through the stools, get out of the body. But unfortunately, we reabsorb 90% of what the liver dumps into the gut, of the toxin the liver dumps into the ducts, through something called intrahepatic recirculation. So why would our smart bodies waste all that metabolic energy to get rid of toxin dumping into the gut and then reabsorb it? Because there's not enough fiber in the gut. As we evolved as a species, we're consuming 150 grams of fiber a day. And now people are consuming 15 to 25 grams of fiber a day. So it's basically 8% less. So how's the body going to work when we sabotage a key mechanism for getting rid of the toxins? So support the body's own natural processes for detoxification. Then the third thing is, if there are high levels and a person's sick, then we want to intervene. And those interventions can be highly specific, like, for example, a person has high levels of lead or mercury, we can give them something like DMSA. It's a relatively non-toxic drug, but it'll have some toxicity, but less toxic than the metals. Or conversely, we can do things like high levels of vitamin C, intervenes with vitamin C. There are a number of things we can do to help and speed the process up. And another one anybody can do, or almost anybody can do, that's really non-toxic, that's saunas. When we sweat out toxins.
So after sharing all of those tips, why do you think the role of these toxins as risk factors are often bypassed in conventional medicine?
Yeah, another very good reason. It's not just in conventional medicine, but even our natural medicine, integrative functional medicine community, I don't think is as aware of toxins as it needs to be. So why do medical doctors not pay much attention to this? Because they weren't taught, pure and simple. They were not taught.
Okay.
And they were taught either it's a toxin at high level where you get acute toxicity, or it's not important. Now, I think that's starting to change, but that's what the medical training has been. But even the more natural training has not paid enough attention to toxins. So I end up writing a new textbook called Clinical Environmental Medicine in order to teach doctors about toxins. And then my main textbook, the textbook of natural medicine, we did an update a couple of years ago. And when I got the chapters in, and these were people who were really knowledgeable about natural health and nutrition, things like this, there was, again, almost no discussion of toxicity. So actually I had to hire one of my bright graduates from Bastyr University to go and update every chapter after I got them back from the authors and add to it toxins, because people just did not have a high enough level of awareness of it. So my textbook in natural medicine is the first major textbook to fully incorporate environmental toxins into the chapters on these diseases. And when I say major textbook, my textbook, Natural Medicine, is sold about 100,000 copies in 4 languages. So it's gotten a lot of attention. And I'm hoping to train doctors to realize you got to pay more attention to the causes. You can't just wait for the heart disease to show up. You can't just wait for the high levels of oxidized cholesterol. You got to get to people before that.
No, definitely not. That would be amazing for you to train them in that regard. So I know you touched on a few points, but what other key tips and tricks should concerned patients do on their end to prevent effects of toxins on their bodies?
So I suggest people think about it in kind of 2 ways: active prevention and passive prevention. So what I mean by that? So active are things people have to actually do. Okay. So for example, you have to go out and buy organic food. Okay. Well, it's a smart idea, but you have to actually do it. Passive things are things that happen regardless of what you do. So for example, in our home, my wife, Laura, and I are very concerned about these toxins. So we put in a whole house air filter. So this is what's called it's rated a MERV 16. People use these MERV 12. That rating determines how effectively it gets toxins out of the air. So we put a MERV 16 air filter into our air filtration, and it's stunning, the difference in our home. I mean, way less dust. And during the summertime, when it's more smoggy, way less pollution in our home. It makes a big difference. Another thing we do is we put a carbon block filter on our water supply coming into the house. So not just a countertop filter for the water you drink, but filter for all the water comes into the house, because when we're taking a shower, a lot of these toxins will volatilize, and then you breathe them in. So by taking it out of the water before it even gets into the house, well, you decrease those toxins. Have people take off their shoes when they come into the house. There's a bunch of things we can do to just decrease our toxic exposure, both actively and passively.
Okay, thank you. So do you have any other concluding takeaways for our audience today?
Yes.
Great.
Our bodies have tremendous ability to heal if we just stop causing damage. So I'm going to tell you just a real quick story about a study I saw, or just describe a study I read a few years ago. I now teach my students all the time. Okay. The study looked at patients with kidney failure. And unfortunately, not only do we have a diabetes epidemic in our country, we now have a kidney failure epidemic in our country as well. So they looked at patients, and you grade the kidney function by five stages. So stage 1, everything's pretty much fine. Stage 5, they're basically waiting for a kidney transplant. So they took patients who were stage 5, and there's a measure of kidney function called EGFR, and the EGFR was 15. Now you want your EGFR to be in the 70s if at all possible, but at least above 60. So EGFR 15 is pretty bad, and they're typically on the wait list for a kidney transplant. So these researchers were really smart. They were aware that one of the reasons why people lose their kidneys is because of the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And one of the ones which is particularly damaging is aspirin. So they did a 6-month study, and what they asked these patients to do, no changes in their life whatsoever, other than stop using aspirin. And after 6 months, the EGFR over doubled. So these people who were told nothing can be done for your kidneys, we're waiting for a kidney transplant. Oh, and they stopped using aspirin, and the kidney function doubled. So why did it double? It's because the body has tremendous ability to heal if you stop damaging it. And aspirin and other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are basically toxins. As far as the body's concerned, they're foreign chemicals that disrupt physiology. So they're toxins we have to get rid of. And it's up to the kidneys. So the kidneys get damaged, get rid of these toxins.
So what would you recommend then? A vitamin, or just try not to take the pain medication at all?
Yes, right. So deal with the causes of the condition and use more natural therapies to reverse the problem so you don't have the inflammation causing the pain that you need to use anti-inflammatories for.
Okay.
So there's no substitute for living a healthy life. Healthy life is rich in nutrients, low in toxins, exercise, lots of exercise, good sleep, healthy relationships, healthy loving relationships. You do those things and your body's going to function pretty well for a long time.
Oh, well, those are wonderful tips. And thank you so much for all of your valuable information today. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Great chatting with you again.
Thank you very much. If you have any questions or any feedback on topics you would like us to discuss in the future, we would love to hear from you. You can always email us at info@cardiometabolichealth.org or on our social media pages on Facebook at Cardiometabolic Health or on Twitter and Instagram at CMHC_CME. Also, please don't forget to rate, subscribe, and follow, and leave us a 5-star review. Thank you so much. And until next time, have a wonderful day, everyone.